We are now going to talk about some basic principles of finance, and I realize that those of you who have studied finance or accounting, this will be extremely familiar to you, and it will be a refresher for you guys. But for the rest of us, we need to review and have clear in our minds a few simple principles of finance. Now, recall that finance is actually trade over time, and the interest rate is the price of trading over time. Now, for a specific financial instrument, the interest rate gets adjusted for things like risk, maturity date, the liquidity of the instrument, and other factors. The basic benchmark financial instrument for money and banking is the United States Treasury bond. The US Treasury bond sets the benchmark or baseline interest rate for a zero risk 100% liquid bond, which means all other securities will have interest rates which are higher, because if nothing else is true, they are more risky. Now let's think about treasury bonds a little bit, because they're the most traded and most referenced financial instrument when we discuss money and banking. The regular person, if you talk about treasury bonds, will probably think national debt, and that's true, but there's more to it than that. Treasury bonds set interest rates for the economy. They provide liquidity in financial markets. They have a market price. That's something people don't probably think about. There is a market in these things. Treasury bonds also serve as collateral for loans between financial entities. They are information insensitive, and they're also an instrument of monetary policy. So a treasury bond is not just any old instrument like a stock. It's a reflection of and enabler of the entire financial system, because it has all these special properties and serves all these functions, and because treasury bonds are 100% safe and 100% liquid. Here is a little bit of evidence to back up what I just said about treasury bonds. Here is the beginning of an article from the New York Times. The topic is why very low interest rates may stick around. Look carefully at what this graph is about. If you look at the bottom very faintly, you can see this is the graph of the 10-year Treasury bond interest rate. So when commentators and analysts discuss the interest rate in the economy, they use the US Treasury bond rate as the illustration or reference point. Here's a little terminology thing. When we say treasury bonds, we normally are using that as a generic name for all the different types of US Treasury securities. Actually, there are three types, strictly speaking. Bonds have a maturity date 10 to 30 years, notes a maturity date of 2 to 10 years, and bills maturity date of 1 year or less. Normally there's no such thing as a treasury bond with a maturity of 1.5 years. You're either 1 year or less, or you jump right up to 2 years. The good news is we'll just keep using the word treasury bonds as the generic word. Once the treasury bond has been issued the very first time, it can then be traded back and forth without limit. The original purchaser of the bond can sell it, and that bond could be changing hands effectively an infinite number of times. Every time a treasury bond is bought and sold, a market price gets paid, and that market price of a bond is perfectly flexible. It can be high, it can be low, depending on the conditions in the economy. As old bonds mature, new bonds are constantly being issued to replace those that have just matured. So approximately about $2 million in treasury bond value gets replaced every year with new treasury bonds. Let's talk about basic finance concepts. There's future value, compound interest, present value, and the interest rate I. If I give you $100 today, that has a present value of $100. The value of that $100 in years from now is called its future value. And the future value will be the present value multiplied by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the power of the number of years, n. It works in reverse too. If I give you $100 n years from now, the future value is 100. To get the present value, I divide by 1 plus I raised to the power n. So present value and future value are connected through the interest rate, which in this example is assumed to be constant, and the number of years until there's maturity. A basis point is 1% of 1%. That's just finance sector terminology. The rule of 72 is an approximation. It came about before calculators existed. If you want to know approximately how long it will take for a payment to double in value at an interest rate of I, divide the number 72 by the interest rate, and you have approximately how long till that value doubles. So for example, if I give you $100 today and the interest rate is 2%, and you want to know how many years until that will double, 72 divided by 2 is 36. At an interest rate of 2%, it takes approximately 36 years for a payment to double in value. Another basic finance concept is the internal rate of return, which is a way to make decisions. If there is an investment project and you wish to decide if it is profitable, what you do is compare its internal rate of return to the prevailing interest rate. And the benchmark is the project should return you an interest rate that is higher than you could get by investing the same amount of money in the financial sector. So if I can get 5% return on a riskless treasury bond, any investment project needs to return me more than 5%. Likewise, if I have alternative investment opportunities, I can use the internal rate of return to compare the relative profitability of one project against another project. The textbook talks more about the internal rate of return and gives examples. Finally, if you recall, At the beginning, I said that this basic finance should be very familiar to those of you with financial training or accounting training. I would caution, however, that it's not quite so simple as the straightforward finance formulas. Here's a good example. Here's a story from the Wall Street Journal about negative interest rates, and it describes an example of one Danish couple that gets paid interest on their mortgage. That's right. They are not paying interest, they are being paid interest, paid with a D, a negative interest rate mortgage. In traditional finance, this should not happen. This should be inconceivable. But negative interest rates are real. They do exist, and we'll talk more about them in future. Next time, we'll talk a little bit more about the structure of treasury bonds. They are called coupon bonds. And we'll also talk a little bit about the relationship between the interest rate and the inflation rate. See you next time.